Racist Karen installs spike strips on my driveway. Didn't know I have a chief judge on speed dial. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping out to your driveway, and finding a row of menacing metal spikes glinting in the sunlight. Your tires, your safety, your very right to exist in your own home, all under threat. Now imagine discovering that the person behind this act of aggression is your neighbor, someone who's supposed to be part of your community. This isn't the plot of a thriller novel. This is my reality. I'm Dr. Marcus Thompson, and this is the story of how my American dream turned into a nightmare of racial prejudice and dangerous retaliation. But it's also a tale of justice, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. When I moved into Oakwood Estates, I thought I was simply buying a beautiful home in a prestigious neighborhood. Little did I know, I was stepping into a battlefield where the weapons were not just words and glares, but spike strips and the law itself. This is the story of how Karen decided that my presence, my success, and even my choice of vehicle were somehow a threat to her way of life. It's a story that exposes the ugly underbelly of racism that still festers in some of America's most affluent communities. But more importantly, it's a story about how justice can prevail, even in the face of deeply entrenched prejudice. As you listen, ask yourself, what would you do if you were in my shoes? How far would you go to protect your rights, your property, and your dignity? And what does it say about our society that such incidents are still happening in 2025? Buckle up. This journey through the winding roads of Oakwood Estates is about to get bumpy. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comment section, and don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more of these gripping real-life accounts. As a successful black attorney specializing in civil rights law, I had always dreamed of owning a home in an upscale neighborhood. After years of hard work, I finally purchased a sprawling property in Oakwood Estates, a picturesque suburb known for its manicured lawns and multi-million-dollar homes. Little did I know that my arrival would stir up a hornet's nest of racial tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Let me paint you a picture of Oakwood Estates. Imagine tree-lined streets with grand houses set back on expansive lots. The kind of place where people jog in the mornings with their purebred dogs and host lavish garden parties on weekends. It's the epitome of suburban affluence, and until recently, it had been almost exclusively white. My new home, a 6,000-square-foot Tudor-style mansion, sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. I was thrilled about the prospect of settling into this idyllic community. As someone who values connection and community, I made it a point to introduce myself to my neighbors, bringing over homemade peach cobbler as a gesture of goodwill. Most of my neighbors were polite, if a bit reserved. But there was one who stood out with Karen. From the moment we met, I could sense her discomfort. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and her words dripped with barely concealed disdain. At first, I brushed off Patricia's behavior as simple unfamiliarity. But as weeks passed, her actions became increasingly hostile. It started with subtle microaggressions, comments about how articulate I was, or thinly veiled surprise at my profession. But soon, it escalated. One Saturday morning, I was washing my new Porsche in the driveway when Karen stormed over, complaining about the noise. Mind you, it was 11 a.m., and the only sound was the gentle splash of water. As I tried to explain, she cut me off, saying, "You people always have to show off, don't you?" The incidents began to pile up. Karen would call the homeowners association to report violations that mysteriously only applied to my property. She'd stand at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, glaring as I came and went. And then came the police calls. The first time it happened, I was hosting a small dinner party for some colleagues. The music was at a reasonable volume, and we were all inside. Suddenly, 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. The officers, looking somewhat embarrassed, explained they'd received a noise complaint. As they left, I caught sight of Karen peeking through her curtains, a smug smile on her face. These encounters left me feeling increasingly isolated and on edge in my own home. I found myself second-guessing every action, wondering if it would provoke another confrontation. The stress began to take its toll, affecting my sleep and my work performance. But my situation wasn't unique. Across the country, similar stories were unfolding. Social media was awash with videos of Karens calling the police on black people for simply existing in spaces they deemed off-limits. From barbecues in public parks to birdwatching in Central Park, it seemed nowhere was safe from the scrutiny of those who saw black presence as a threat. These incidents were symptoms of a deeper issue. As more black professionals like myself moved into predominantly white neighborhoods, long-standing racial tensions were bubbling to the surface. The changing demographics threatened the status quo, and some, like Patricia, were lashing out in fear and anger. My presence in Oakwood Estates was a catalyst, forcing the community to confront its own biases and prejudices. Some neighbors, to their credit, began to reach out, offering support and condemning Patricia's actions. Others remained silent, perhaps uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight on racial issues in their idyllic enclave. As I navigated this minefield of racial politics, I couldn't help but reflect on the words of sociologist Elijah Anderson: when an unfamiliar black person enters the white space, often the people there immediately try to make sense of him or her, to determine who that is, or to figure out the nature of the person's business and whether they need to be concerned. I was living that reality every day in Oakwood Estates. Despite my professional success and my efforts to be a good neighbor, to some, I would always be an intruder, a threat to their perceived way of life. But I refused to be driven out. This was my home now, and I was determined to stand my ground. Little did I know that Patricia's hostility was about to escalate in a way that would shock the entire community and test the limits of the law. How do you think the protagonist's presence affected the dynamics of this predominantly white neighborhood? As the days turned into weeks, Patricia's hostility escalated from subtle jabs to outright aggression. It was as if she had decided that my very existence in Oakwood Estates was a personal affront to her way of life. The complaints became more irrational and frequent, each one more absurd than the last. "Your car is too flashy," she'd say, her voice dripping with disdain as she glared at my Porsche parked in my driveway. "You drive like you own the road." Ironically, I did own the road, or at least the property adjacent to it. But to Patricia, my success was a threat, and my presence was a reminder of everything she resented. Then came the verbal harassment. One afternoon, as I returned home from work, I found Karen waiting for me at the edge of her lawn. With arms crossed and a scowl etched on her face, she shouted, "You think you're better than everyone else just because you have a nice car? You don't belong here." Her words cut deeper than any physical attack could have. I attempted to resolve the situation peacefully. I approached her one evening while she was watering her garden, hoping to clear the air. "Patricia," I began, "I want to be a good neighbor. Can we talk about what's been bothering you?" But instead of engaging in a constructive conversation, she launched into a tirade about how I was ruining the neighborhood's charm with my loud music and excessive traffic. In reality, I had only hosted a few small gatherings with friends and family, gatherings that were no louder than any other social event in the community. Despite my efforts to reach out, Patricia's animosity only grew. She began calling the police regularly with unfounded complaints about noise and disturbances. Each time they arrived, they would find nothing amiss. The officers were polite but clearly annoyed by her incessant calls. "Ma'am," one officer said during a particularly tense encounter, "you can't keep calling us for every little thing." But Karen didn't care. She thrived on the chaos she created. Then came the day that changed everything. One morning, as I prepared to leave for work, I noticed something strange on my driveway. At first glance, it looked like an odd arrangement of gravel and debris. But as I stepped closer, my heart sank. There they were, spike strips. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized what they were designed to do. These metal spikes were hidden beneath a thin layer of gravel, camouflaged enough to catch anyone off guard who might drive into my driveway without knowing they were there. The potential danger was staggering. Not only could they shred tires, but they could also cause accidents if someone swerved unexpectedly to avoid them. I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. This was not just vandalism, it was an outright attack on my safety and property. The illegal nature of this act was clear. No one had the right to set traps on their property intended to cause harm to others. At that moment, I knew I had to act swiftly. I pulled out my phone and documented everything: photos of the spike strips in place, close-ups of the spikes themselves, and even video footage of my driveway from various angles. This evidence would be crucial in holding Karen accountable for her reckless behavior. After gathering all the necessary documentation, I made an appointment with a local attorney specializing in neighbor disputes and civil rights issues. As I recounted the events leading up to this moment, my attorney's expression shifted from concern to determination. "This is serious," he said firmly. "We can take legal action against her for harassment and endangerment." With legal counsel on my side, I decided it was time for a confrontation. Armed with evidence and an unwavering resolve, I approached Patricia's house later that week. As I knocked on her door, adrenaline coursed through me. When she opened it, surprise flickered across her face before it morphed back into that familiar scowl. "Patricia," I began calmly but firmly, "we need to talk about what you did." Her eyes narrowed defensively as she crossed her arms again. "What are you talking about?" "The spike strips you installed on my driveway," I stated plainly. "I have evidence that you did this intentionally to damage my property." Her reaction was immediate, denial mixed with indignation. "I didn't do anything. You're just trying to make me look bad because you're jealous." "Jealous? Of what? Her petty complaints? Her attempts to intimidate me?" It was absurd. "Patricia," I pressed on, maintaining my composure despite her escalating hostility. "This isn't about jealousy, it's about safety and legality. What you did is illegal and dangerous." She scoffed at me dismissively but couldn't hide the flicker of fear in her eyes as she realized how serious this situation had become. "You think you can just come here and threaten me?" she spat back defiantly. "I'm not threatening you. I'm holding you accountable for your actions," I replied firmly. "You need to understand that this behavior has consequences." As our heated exchange continued, it became increasingly clear that Patricia's motivations were rooted in something deeper than mere annoyance or jealousy over my presence in the neighborhood. They were steeped in racial prejudice and fear of change. In that moment of confrontation, it dawned on me that Karen saw me not just as a neighbor but as an embodiment of everything she resented: progress, diversity, and success that challenged her worldview. The conversation ended without resolution, only more animosity between us, but it marked a turning point in this escalating conflict. My resolve strengthened. I would not back down or allow her actions to go unchecked. As I walked away from her house that day, determination surged within me like never before. This battle wasn't just about me anymore, it was about standing up against racism and injustice in all its forms. What do you think motivated the neighbor to take such extreme and dangerous actions? As I stood there, staring at the malicious spike strips on my driveway, I knew this was the moment to take decisive action. My years as a civil rights attorney had prepared me for this, and I wasn't about to let Patricia's blatant racism and dangerous actions go unchallenged. With a steady hand, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use in such a personal capacity, that of Chief Judge Evelyn Hawkins, an old law school friend and respected jurist known for her unwavering commitment to justice. "Evelyn," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "I need your help. It's time to put an end to this." The legal wheels began turning swiftly. Within hours, I was in Judge Hawkins' chambers, presenting a meticulously prepared complaint along with irrefutable evidence, photos, videos, and a detailed log of Patricia's escalating behavior over the months. The judge listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grave as she reviewed the documentation. "Marcus," she said finally, looking up at me with a mix of concern and determination, "this goes beyond simple neighbor disputes. What we're dealing with here is a clear case of harassment, property damage, and potential hate crime. We need to act quickly." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal activity. A temporary restraining order was issued against Patricia, prohibiting her from any contact with me or my property. The police were notified, and the spike strips were carefully removed and logged as evidence. A formal investigation was launched into Patricia's actions, with potential charges ranging from criminal mischief to attempted assault. As news of the incident spread through Oakwood Estates, the community's reaction was swift and polarizing. Many of my neighbors, shocked by the extent of Patricia's actions, rallied around me in support. I received countless calls, texts, and even home-cooked meals left on my doorstep, gestures of solidarity that touched me deeply. "We had no idea it was this bad," my next-door neighbor, Tom, said to me one evening, his face etched with concern. "We should have spoken up sooner. This isn't what our community stands for." However, not everyone was supportive. A small but vocal minority seemed to side with Patricia, arguing that I was overreacting or playing the race card. Their whispered comments and sidelong glances served as a stark reminder that the battle against racism was far from over, even in our supposedly progressive enclave. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I found myself grappling with a complex mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, that Patricia's dangerous behavior had been halted. But there was also a deep-seated anger and disappointment that it had come to this in the first place. "I moved here thinking I'd found my dream home," I confided to Judge Hawkins over coffee one day. "Instead, I've been thrust into a nightmare of racial prejudice and fear. How do I reconcile that?" Evelyn's response was both compassionate and challenging. "Marcus," she said, leaning forward, "what happened to you is inexcusable. But consider this, your stand against injustice here isn't just about you. It's a wake-up call for this entire community. Sometimes, it takes a shock to the system to bring about real change." Her words resonated with me, sparking a realization. This ordeal, as painful as it had been, had also presented an opportunity, a chance to confront the insidious racism that lurked beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic neighborhood and to work towards genuine inclusivity and understanding. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into community engagement with renewed vigor. I organized town hall meetings to discuss racial issues openly, worked with the HOA to implement anti-discrimination policies, and even started a mentorship program for minority youth interested in law and social justice. As I stand here today, looking out over the changed landscape of Oakwood Estates, I'm reminded of the words of Martin Luther King Jr., "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." My experience has shown me that sometimes we need to be the ones to bend that arc, to stand up, speak out, and fight for the justice and equality that should be the birthright of every American, regardless of the color of their skin. The road ahead may be long, but I'm committed to walking it, one step at a time, towards a future where no one has to fear spike strips on their driveway simply because of who they are. How do you think this incident might impact future race relations in the neighborhood? As we conclude this powerful story of resilience and justice, it's crucial to reflect on the broader implications and the role each of us can play in combating racism and discrimination. I urge you, the viewers, to take an active stance against racism and discrimination in your own communities. Here are some concrete steps you can take. Educate yourself about the history of racism and its current manifestations. Knowledge is power, and understanding the roots of racial injustice is the first step in fighting it. Speak up when you witness acts of racism or discrimination. Remember, silence can be interpreted as complicity. Use your voice to challenge bigotry and support those who are targeted. Support organizations working towards racial justice. This can include volunteering your time, donating resources, or amplifying their messages on social media. Engage in community conversations about race and diversity. Creating safe spaces for open dialogue can help bridge divides and foster understanding. Advocate for anti-racist policies in your local institutions, including schools, workplaces, and government. The fight against racism and discrimination is not just a legal battle, but a moral imperative that requires the collective effort of society. While legal channels are powerful tools in combating injustice, they are most effective when coupled with grassroots movements and changes in societal attitudes. By standing up against racism, supporting those who face discrimination, and using legal and social channels to fight injustice, we can work towards a future where stories like mine become relics of the past rather than reflections of the present. Thank you for listening to my story. Now, I pass the baton to you. What will you do to fight racism and discrimination in your community? How do you think this incident might impact future race relations in the neighborhood? Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more of this gripping story.